We're now down to the final three OHL team history videos. I've been doing this series to pass the time here in the off season, looking at the all 20 OHL teams and how they've come to be where they are today. And if you've been following along, hope you've been enjoying this series. But if this is your first time tuning in, I do have a playlist with the other teams I've done up to this point. And for today's video, we're looking at the Kingston Frontenacs. Now, for the Frontenacs, their history it's interesting. I didn't know half of this stuff up until I started doing the research. I thought I knew the Kingston Frontenacs history, but there was more to it. They were officially a member of the Ontario Hockey League in 1973 as an expansion team, but it was kind of an interesting way how it worked out. So the Frontenacs, there was a team known as the Frontenacs dating back to 1897. And when they were named after the governor of New France, who established Fort Frontenac in modern day Kingston. And what's really fascinating is how they were the first team to ever win the J. Ross Robertson Cup. That was in the 1898-99 season. So the trophy that teams in the Ontario Hockey League play for year in, year out was first won by a team known as the Kingston Frontenacs. There you go. You've got a little trivia to talk about next time you meet up with friends and family about hockey. After that, though, the franchise, they've also been known as the Victorias from 1945 to 52 before being renamed the Frontenacs again while playing in the Junior B ranks. So you had the Frontenacs team that was playing Tier 2 and Junior B. But then in 1972, it was an interesting time because the Montreal Junior Canadiens, they were a part of the Ontario Hockey Association, but because there was no junior hockey in Quebec, Montreal was allowed to play in Ontario. But the QMJHL league was formed in the early 1970s, and they wanted a team in Montreal. So they actually threatened to sue the OHA. So what they decided was Montreal would be suspended for a season and would use that year to transition to playing in the Q. So bring in the Kingston Frontenacs, who were playing at the time, and they were granted an expansion spot. So basically taking over the Montreal Junior Canadiens position in the OHA, and they would rename themselves the Kingston Canadiens. So that's how the Canadiens name came about. They were assuming the spot of the Montreal Junior Canadiens in the junior ranks. So they took their spot in 1973, and they would have that name up until 1988. And then they would change to the Kingston Raiders when there was an ownership change. But that only lasted one season, and the team was then sold again in 1989, and they rebranded as the Kingston Frontenacs as we know them now. So I thought that was fascinating. I didn't realize how in-depth the Kingston name was and how it changed and how it came to be. So things you learn when you do these team history videos. So for the top 10 scorers in franchise history, I'm including the Kingston Canadiens, Raiders, and the Frontenacs. So I figured it's one team. They just changed names a couple of times. So starting off at the top, Kelly Corpse. He leads the team in scoring. He had 135 goals, 285 assists, 420 points during his time in Kingston. In second, we have Nathan Moon. He had 139 goals, 193 assists, 332 points. Mike Zigomanis, he's third in franchise scoring, 132 goals, 198 assists, 330 points. David Ling, he is fourth in franchise scoring, 115 goals, 160 assists, 275 points. And then in fifth, we have Scott Metcalf, 103 goals, 170 assists, 273 points. And then we have Colin Chalk. He's sixth with 91 goals, 177 assists, 268 points. Mike Oliveira, he is seventh with 93 goals, 173 assists, 266 points. And then Bobby Hughes, he has the eighth spot in franchise scoring, 103 goals, 150 assists, 253 points. Spencer Watson comes in at number 9 with 119 goals, 129 assists, 248 points. And rounding out the top 10 in franchise scoring is Mike Siltella, 109 goals, 132 assists, good for 241 points. Now we're going to shift our focus to goaltenders in the top 5 in wins. Jeremy Helvig, he leads the way. He had 81 wins during his time in Kingston. Then you have Chris Clifford. He had 75 wins, so he's second overall. In third, Lucas Parasini. He had 68 wins during his time in Kingston. Mark Lamoth, he is fourth with 56 wins during his time in Kingston. And rounding out the top five is Tyler Moss with his 52 wins with the Kingston organization. Now, they don't retire numbers in Kingston, but they do have honored numbers. And I think it's interesting how they broke it up. You have the Canadians' honored numbers. So number 5, Mike O'Connell. Number 7, Tony McKegney. Number 10 of Brad Rhines. 14, Ken Linsman. And 29, Chris Clifford. So those are the honored numbers from their time as the Kingston Canadians. And under the Frontenacs, we have number 7 of Mike Zigomanis. 13 of Anthony Stewart. 17 of David Ling. 24, Chris Stewart. So the Stewart brothers have both had their numbers honored. And then number 88 of Kelly Corpse. So a lot of honored numbers, none retired. And since the team arrived in Kingston to play in the Ontario Hockey League, 105 players for the Canadians, Raiders, and Frontenacs have all gone on to play in the National Hockey League. Now, looking at the playoff history, you're going to notice a trend because for the Kingston Frontenacs, their history is similar to the Sarnia Sting. If you haven't seen the Sarnia Sting team history video, basically they've only had one solid run during their time in Sarnia. And for the Kingston Frontenacs, they have not yet appeared in an OHL championship, and they've only earned 2 OHL division titles. So it's been rough if you're a Kingston Frontenacs fan. We're going to start in 2000, and in 2000, they lost in the first round to the Sudbury Wolves in 5 games. 2001, another first-round exit, this time to the Belleville Bulls in 4 games. In 2002, they missed the playoffs because they lost the tiebreaker against the North Bay Centennials. So they were both tied for 8th in points. They play a tiebreaker. The Centennials go into the playoffs, and the Frontenacs would miss the postseason. 2003, they missed the playoffs again. 2004, back in the playoffs, but a first-round exit to the Barrie Colts in 5 games. They would then miss the playoffs in 2005, back in the playoffs in 2006, but again knocked out in the first round by the Sudbury Wolves in 6 games. Another first-round exit in 2007. That was against the Oshawa Generals in 5. Again, missing the playoffs in 2008, 2009. It's hard to get momentum when they miss the playoffs. You would think with the OHL cycle, when you miss the playoffs, you get high draft picks, and then in a few years, you should be able to compete. But for Kingston, just they're getting some talented players, but then not hitting the contender status. Then they just go and miss the playoffs again and start over. It feels like a constant rebuild with the Kingston Frontenacs. So in 2010, and again, they're back in the playoffs, but it's also a first-round exit, this time to the Brampton Battalion in 7 games. 2011, out in the first round again, this time to the Oshawa Generals. And in 2012, out of the playoffs again. This team cannot catch a break. 2013, they're back in the postseason. They're out in the first round, swept by the Barrie Colts. Another first-round exit in 2014. They lose to the Peterborough Petes in 7 games. Yep, 2015, another first-round exit, this time to the North Bay Battalion in 4 games. But in 2016, the Kingston Frontenacs, they make it to the second round, this time eliminated by the Niagara Ice Dogs in 4 games. But they went to the second round. First time since the 90s that Kingston saw second-round playoff hockey. 2017, they would get right back into the second round, this time swept by the Peterborough Petes. But 2018 was a magical season for the Kingston Frontenacs as they would go all the way to the Eastern Conference Final, but were knocked out by the Hamilton Bulldogs in 5 games. So that team was electric. They ended up being buyers at the trade deadline. You had players like Gabe Velarde, who was brought in. You also had Sean Day brought in from the Windsor Spitfires. So they wanted to go for it, and they just ran into a Hamilton Bulldogs team that would end up winning that championship in 2018. After that deep playoff run, out of the playoffs. They miss it again. So no playoffs in 2020 or 21. In 2022, Kingston, they would go all the way to the second round of the playoffs, but were knocked out in 5 by the North Bay Battalion. In 2023, they missed the playoffs again. And then this past season, 2024, another first-round exit at the hands of the North Bay Battalion in 5 games. So Kingston right now, they have the second longest championship drought in the OHL, 1 year less than the Sudbury Wolves, who have the longest drought in league history. So for Kingston, as I mentioned, they've only won the East Division twice. That was in 1995 and 2016. And they've only reached the conference final twice, 1993 and 2018. So it's really unfortunate that this franchise had such bad luck. It could be management, could be coaching, could be scouting. And your guess is as good as mine. This is a franchise that just continuously finds themselves missing the playoffs, just not able to get into the cycle where they become competitive outside of the run in 2018. Now, the Frontenacs, they do play in one of the nicest arenas in the OHL. I could see them hosting a Memorial Cup, but it comes down to, can they put together a competitive hockey team? Because that's what you want to see if you're going to host the Memorial Cup. They did put in a bid for this past season, losing to the Saginaw Spirit, but I think the questions were there. Would they have a competitive team? And what we saw last season, they ended up 7th in the Eastern Conference standings. The Barrie Colts, who were outside the playoffs at the trade deadline, nearly caught up to them down the stretch. So they did do the coaching change last year. Luca Caputi was let go, and they bring in Troy Mann. His systems seem to be picking up some steam. The players seem to be buying into it, and we'll see what can happen next year. I feel like Kingston's that team a lot of fans forget about because they're not usually competitive. But I feel like next season, maybe we start to see a shift. The Frontenacs, I think they've got enough returning players that they could compete. You got Mason Vicari in net. They just picked up Owen Lalonde from the Saginaw Spirit. So maybe next year is a year they could break out. We'll have to wait and see. But you do have to feel for the fans in Kingston that they've been waiting so long for a championship team. But they still haven't even seen an OHL final since entering the league back in 1973. If you're a Frontenacs fan, I know this sounds a little bleak, but what was your highlight as a fan of this hockey club? Love to see the interaction. As I mentioned, this will be added to the playlist, looking at OHL team histories. And after this, 2 more teams to go. And then that's it. So again, thank you very much for all your support. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. That goes a long way in supporting this channel as we continue to grow and cover the Ontario Hockey League. Thank you very much again, and we'll talk to you again soon.